Welcome to the Navigator podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Navigator Academy podcast. With me today is Jack Duggal. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, Brad.
Jack is a transformational leader and facilitator with a passion to seek and spark different perspectives in how to evolve and grow stronger with the dance of organizations and life. His purpose is to inspire and equip people and organizations to make a difference and impact through transformational strategy execution in a persistently turbulent world. An internationally recognized expert and top-rated faculty in strategy execution, PMO, leadership, and change, his next-generation ideas have been adopted and implemented in organizations around the world. Jack is the founder and managing principal of Projectize Group. He works with leading organizations from NASA to Silicon Valley and governments around the world. He's also a dear friend and compatriot. So good to have you and good to see you, Jack.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you for your kind introduction.
It was. I wondered who I was like reading about, but then I knew it was you. So, I mean, you and I have known each other for years, and I've learned a lot from you over those years about the importance of setting up the organization for both portfolio and project management maturity. What do you see as the essential prerequisites?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Brad. Everybody wants to implement, PMOs and portfolio management processes and so on. But I think one of the very, very key distinction is understanding the difference between what I call apps versus OS, or the operating system. Mm-hmm. So the key thing is everybody wants to implement, new methodologies, new processes, or the next new thing, just like a cool app. But the challenge is, if I have my, an iPhone and you have an Android, my apps won't work there unless they are programmed for your operating system. So what we see in our work with organizations around the world is everybody wants to jump onto the next cool idea, but their OS, their operating system, is not ready for it. So I think one of the key prerequisites is to create the right conditions in which we can implement these processes, portfolio management systems, PMOs. I'll just give you a very quick example, sure, which I'm working on right now with a very prominent biotech firm. And this is just yesterday, we had a meeting with a senior leadership team. And they are big into R&D and, all kinds of processes. So one of the struggles is, how do we allocate the funds over the next 2 to 3 years? And everybody's doing different research projects and so on. And how do we manage our pipeline? So they wanted to implement a portfolio management process, right? So the PMO contacted us. So yesterday we did a kickoff. And it was very, very interesting, right? Typically, when we started, all the senior leadership teams, the CFO, the R&D head, the product development head, they're all, oh, here we go again. It's going to be like process talk and, projects and this and that. But what was very key, and what I mean by the operating system and creating the right conditions, is I worked with the VP of marketing, and we framed the whole conversation as, how do we manage our innovation flow going forward, right? And it totally transformed the perspective to, not without getting into too much details. By the time we ended, everybody was so energized and excited, because it all became about managing our innovation flow. How do we take ideas, put it into research, and then product development, and so on and so forth. And it was no longer about boring portfolio process and governance and so on. Of course, that's the underlying foundation.
Yeah, right, they're still going to have it, but now it's got a purpose.
Exactly. The whole framing is different. So I think these are some very key prerequisites, to create the right conditions before we jump on into implementing some of these things.
Cool. So you literally wrote the book on next generation of project management and the PMO. So can you tell us more about the book in a non-big commercial, but what are some of the big ideas within that?
Yeah, sure. So very quickly, the three big ideas. First of all, the title, the DNA. And, I know everybody tries to use that, but literally over the last 15 years or so, I've thought a lot about it. And one key distinction is for the last 100+ years, our organizational mindset of framing has been that organizations are very mechanical, factory oriented. But the more we've thought about it, the more you really, if you start to think about it, organizations, organic, organism, living, breathing, right? So the whole fundamental metaphor changes when we think about organizations and businesses as complex living systems, so to speak. So one of the ideas we've introduced is building on that is, what if we could decode the DNA of effective strategy execution, and it started, by the way, when I was literally deep into analyzing PMOs, assessing PMOs, right. And the question came to me, just as DNA contains the genetic instructions in the development of functioning human living organisms, any kind of living organisms, right? The question was, is there a code or a blueprint that we could decode that contains the elements of management and strategy execution, or even doing projects? So this has been a long journey over the last 15 years. I think we have started to decode that, and we've identified 7 elements. So the book literally decodes these 7 elements. Each of the elements is a chapter. For example, strategy, execution, governance, change, measurement, and so on. So that's one of the key ideas. The second big idea, I think you alluded to, was the dance, right? So dance is an acronym which we've been thinking about, for over 15 years or so. It's very similar to a term that many of your listeners might have heard, VUCA, which I hadn't heard before, for a long time. But VUCA is a term that came out of the Department of Defense, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I hadn't heard that term. I guess I've been thinking about the dance, and when I came across these 2 terms, they kind of dance, I call it, is like the next generation of VUCA. So the dance stands for dynamic, ambiguous. There's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty, and stands for non-linear. We grew up with the thinking that the world is linear, but the more we understand the world, our projects, they are not linear, they are non-linear. C stands for complex, and E stands for emergent and unpredictable. So if we really think about it, in today's world, we live in a dance world. And I think we've always lived in it, but what's different, Brad, right now is that the volume, right? The number, the volume, the velocity, and the variety of these changes and the dance is just crazy. So we need a whole new way to think about project management and strategy execution in a whole different way. So that's the second big idea. And then the third big idea is taking that into consideration. What should the next generation of project management look like, right? The old generation, we can summarize it in basically 4 words or 4 letters: SPEC, which is essentially, all of the project management body of knowledge and so on, right? Which is SPEC: scope, plan, execute, and control. But in this new world of the dance and the next generation, we need a whole different mindset. And so the book gets into what should that look like. We question what should the next generation look like.
Awesome. Cool. No, and I mean, it's on my bookshelf, so definitely read through it every other year just to go, yep,
on mine too.
So I see it on that. So with PMOs, especially, we're talking in this industry that to me, it spans across just project management. It's an organizational paradigm and function. What are the 3 common mistakes you see in organizations that try to instill them?
Common mistakes, right? So here's the first one. Whenever we work with PMOs, and typically, with hundreds of organizations around the world, one of the key things that typically PMOs start with is process. So they are either creating process, documenting process, investigating process, training process, coaching process, supporting process. And that's fine. But what's missing often, and which is probably more important than process, is the other dimension, which is behavior, right? So there's a disconnect where, we are documenting, communicating, and implementing process. But if the conditions are not right, and people who are going to use that process, their behavior, there's a disconnect between that. They're not even aware of the process. They don't understand the process, or they don't adopt it and apply it. What good is that? So my question typically to PMOs is, how much time do you spend in developing, implementing, governing, communicating, training process, right? And typically the response will be 80-90% of their time.
Right, doing that. Yep, exactly.
Which is totally flipped. It should either be, not saying that it's not important. Of course, we want process, but you need to balance it with focusing on behavior aspects as well. So I think that's one common mistake. The other one is, again, they all kind of relate to each other. The second one is how much process. Of course, the pushback you'll get, we want discipline, we want standards. And yes, we know that. But how much? So one of the mistakes they make is they don't know how to find their sweet spot of balance between how much process is good for us, how much are we willing to adapt, right? So the mantra that we talk about a lot, and there's a whole chapter in my book as well, is how do we achieve rigor? Of course, rigor is important. We want discipline, but how do we achieve rigor without rigidity, right? So that should be the mantra whenever you're trying to implement PMO or portfolio management processes, is how do we accomplish and find the sweet spot between rigor without rigidity? I guess you told 3, right? So
I'll move to your next question. You're awesome.
But the third one, real quickly, is whenever we try to go about doing these things, right, we tend to err on the side of more. All right, more structure, more roles and responsibilities, more process. And we think if we have that more, we'll be better off. But often that when we go in the direction of more, it tends to complicate things more. Right. So one of the things I talk about is, if you get a chance, and I think many of my clients have adapted this as well now, if you get a chance, don't even call it a PMO. You know what you should call it? The Department of Simplicity. The Department of Simplicity. And you know what? If you just do that, just practice that one thing, your customers, your stakeholders, your sponsors are going to love you, because every organization needs that. We need to so the mantra is less is more from a PMO standpoint. So that's another common mistake I see.
Well, and again, simplicity does not mean we have nothing. It just means that it's simple. We have rigor, not rigidity. No, and I fully agree with that, is that especially in the culture that many of these organizations are in, they're entrepreneurial, and process is a dirty 7-letter word. And project management just is the worst word of that. So it's again laying all the tenets that you just put in there. Quick question. I mean, we talk also portfolio management and executive management. And many of our clients, they're out there, they want to go win something, but they know that they actually don't really want to go win that. So I always find that portfolio management is about prioritization, and prioritization is about learning to say no. Give me a little bit of insight on your experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail right on. A lot of people get confused what it's about, but exactly like you said, Brad, portfolio management is more about saying no and prioritization. Many people get confused with this. They think it's a very big word, strategy, and what does that mean? The simplest definition of strategy, and it comes from many sources from Harvard and so on. The simplest definition, simplest way to understand strategy is about saying no to things, making tough choices, right? Strategy is all about making tough choices and saying no to things. And it's very hard. I get it. It's very hard to kill projects and so on. It's like, if you're driving, right, someplace, let's say on the weekend, to a mall, or someplace, and you ask, whoever's in the car with you, your kids, hey, can you please check on your phone if the mall is open? And they look up and they say, hey, Dad, no, it looks like the mall is closed already. We are late. And you say, oh, no, we've come this far. Let's keep driving anyway.
Exactly. Right.
It's like that doesn't make sense, but we do projects in the same way. So one very important tip I could share with you, which works very well, what is the strategic question, right? Related to saying no, right? So if your sponsors, if your executives come to you and they tell you to do this, right? Whatever that is. And of course, your list is expanding,
Exactly.
right? And your projects are expanding. So this is known as, this comes from Michael Bungay-Stanier, and he says, this is known as the strategic question, which is, if you're saying yes to this, whatever that is, the project or priority or whatever, right? If you're saying yes to this, what are we saying no to?
Yep.
Right? That is the strategic question. And if you can't come up with that, that means you're not practicing strategy. You're not making the tough choices.
And again, upfront, many times that this occurs before the project is even created in a lot of the companies we work with. So it's like, what is that executive strategy and how are we fulfilling it? Awesome. Again, you wrote this book. I know you also read a lot. What's a current business book you're reading, and what are you learning from it?
One of the books that just came across my desk, which I got fascinated is A Radical Curiosity, questioning commonly held beliefs to imagine flourishing futures. I know there's a long subtitle, but what intrigued me, it's by Seth Goldenberg. What intrigued me was the title Radical Curiosity. And I think it's so important. One of the points he makes is curiosity is an endangered species. And we think we are curious, but at a very superficial level. Curiosity is not just Googling stuff or watching videos on YouTube or TikTok. It's really engaging deeply to tough, instead of, just thinking about solutions, to focus more on questions. What are the questions we should be addressing? Another very important point he made is that we are living in between times, what he calls it. And it's a very liminal stage where, and it connected with me very much. It resonated with me because my whole brand is all about the next generation. So distinguishing the traditional, the legacy from the next generation. So we're living in that in-between time. So curiosity becomes very important. And the last thing that really resonated with me about this was, he said one of the key things, right, which is like the most important natural resource we need in these type of in-between times, is imagination, right? Imagination and creativity is the most valuable natural resource on earth we have. So we need to tap into that more by being radically curious.
Awesome. Well, again, this has been the most thought-provoking one, which I knew it would be. So again, I appreciate your time, Jack, and just the ounces of wisdom or kernels of truth and things, and again, curiosity. So I hope people follow up with this, and again, your book, to really understand PMOs and again, the whole kind of organism. So awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Brad, for the opportunity.
Take care.
Cheers.